Virtual Machine Manager integration in ACI. Okay, everyone, so we have been discussing the type of domains that we have in ACI, from the physical domain, the external bridge domain, or the L2L, and the external routed domain. Now we need to discuss and take a look at VMM, or Virtual Machine Manager integration. And this is our virtual domain integration in ACI. And this means that we can have a VMware's a vCenter environment synced to our ACI environment, as well as Hyper-V, OpenStack, and container-based environment as Kubernetes. We are going to focus in VMware's vCenter solution. So in order for us to configure a VMware VMM integration, we need the following prerequisites. We need to have a vCenter environment 6.0 or above with the enterprise license and enable for virtual distributed switches, or VDS. You need to have a user account that has administration privilege on VMware's vCenter. So you can add, remove, you can change configurations in the vCenter side, etc. An ACI dynamic VLAN pool object. And if you remember on the physical domains and the external domains, we have a VLAN pool and we can either select static or dynamic. In this case, we want to create one with dynamic, I should say. It should be a dynamic VLAN pool, which means that as I keep associating my vCenter environment or my VMN domain to an endpoint group, it will grab a VLAN ID of that pool and just going to associate it to a port group. A vSwitch configuring LACP. We want to enable link aggregation control protocol between my ACI environment and my ESXi host. And let's draw with what we're going to be working in this video. So I have an ESXi host, right? So we have ESXi1, in which we have two interfaces on the host side, and this will be VMNIC. I believe it's 3. Yes, this one is 3. And this one is going to be 0. Okay, so we have VMNIC 3 and VMNIC 0 going to leaf 1 and leaf 2 over port 1/6. 1/6, okay? Both of them. And this is a VPC, which means we need to configure a interface policy group that is a VPC, a interface profile, associate to ports 1/6 to this VPC policy group, attach the interface profile to my switch profile that has both leaf 1 and leaf 2. Once we do that, then we create an attachable entity profile in which we are going to assign the dynamic VLAN pool object. Once we have all those prerequisites, we can go ahead and configure the VMM integration. Okay? So we're going to be working with this scenario here. Again, interfaces 1/6, mode is VPC between leaf 1 and leaf 2. Finally, when we configure our VMM integration, we select CDP and LLDP on our vSwitch settings. Okay? So we are going to select LACP, and also we're going to select a CDP and LLDP. And I'll show you a very cool way of doing this without you making those objects, because you can reuse the same objects as you have. But when you do VMM integration, the ACI APEC will auto-generate those particular policy group objects. Okay? So you're going to see that it's going to show LLDP enable, but it's going to show a very weird name. It's ACI _LLDP. You'll see it. So let's go ahead and configure this. And also, I would like for you to see how cool it is. Once it's all configured, I'm going to make a quick tenant. We're going to create a quick endpoint group, and we'll attach the VMM domain. So you can see right as soon as I attach the domain, you're going to see a virtual distributed switch creating a port group in vCenter automatically. So the ACI is just going to do the call. It's going to auto-configure that port group for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so as we discussed in this particular scenario, we are going to enable the connection between my physical environment to my VMware vCenter environment. And when I mean physical environment, my ACI fabric, my leafs, they need to allow traffic from and to vCenter. And the way that we do that with a VMM integration is by configuring a VMM domain and then attaching a dynamic VLAN pool onto this particular domain. So once we attach that VMM domain onto a particular EPG, it's going to auto push a port group to vCenter. The port group, we then use that port group to associate to a VM that we want to participate or be part of XYZ endpoint group. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's start by configuring the policy groups. Let's configure the interface profile. Let's attach the interface profile to the switch profile, which then we configure the attachable access entity profile, and we finally configure the VMM domain. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and configure a policy group, right click, and it's the VPC because we are dual home on that particular ESXi host. We're dual homing into both leaf 1 and 2. So let's go ahead and select VPC. And we're going to call this something that we know that is related to the VMM integration. Okay, so I think this is a good name. ESXi VMM policy group, link level policy. I am running 1 gig on my ESXi connected to the leaves. CDP policy. Okay, so we can either enable this particular object, or when we configure the VMM domain integration, it's going to auto-create those objects. So it's going to make the CDP policy as well as the LODP policy and the port channel policy. So basically, those are the 3 items that we have to configure. So we can either select the one that we currently have, or we just configure VMM and then use the auto-generated objects from the VMM configuration. So I'm going to select this one, and then I'll show you what would happen if I decide to use the ones that the VMM domain config auto-configure, which is basically going to do the same, okay? Ready? So port channel policy, we want to make it LACP, and that looks good. Let's press submit. We have the ESXi VMM policy group. Let's build that interface profile, and let's go ahead, interface profile. In this case, it's going to be ESXi Ethernet 1.6, because 1.6 is my interface on the leaves connected to the ESXi host that we want to assign to. Okay, let's select the interface selectors. And in this case, we're going to use Ethernet 1.6. And let's select 1.6. And then now we are going to reference our policy group that we just built onto this port selector. Okay, we'll press OK. And now we have the interface profile, ESXi Ethernet 1.6. And you know what? Because we can have physical domains also associated to ESXi, let's label this VMM. So we know that it's strictly for VMM communication, okay? All right, so we have the leaf profile. Now what we need to do is associate to the leaf profile. And because it's a VPC, we are selecting leaf 101 and 102 because this particular port 6 is going to be connected on both 1 and 2, and then there's going to be dual connections on my ESXi host to this particular leaf. So let me go ahead and assign the profile. In this case, we are assigning my ESXi interface profile, which we just configured seconds ago. Let's press submit. Okay, so now we have the ESXi VMM Ethernet profile. Let's build a VLAN pool because we need a dynamic VLAN pool. So we are creating one right now. VMM. Okay, so we have the dynamic VLAN pool. And let's go ahead and select the range. So I'm going to use 300 through 360. And it's going to be allocated dynamically. This is how we select that to be a dynamic interface. And finally, we are going to use this particular pool to auto provision port groups in vCenter. And we're going to see that in the demonstration once we finish the VMM integration. We'll press submit. So now we got our dynamic VLAN pool created. Let's go ahead and create a attachable access entity profile in which we are going to reference our VMM domain configuration. Okay, well, let's label this VMM AEP because it's the attachable access entity profile. And because we don't have a VMM domain configured yet, we just select this and then attach the VMM interface policy group that we configured previously, which is ESXi VMM. And let's say we're selecting all interface participating in this VPC, and we'll press finish. Okay, so we now have the VMM integration, and we have the ESXi VMM port group associated to it. So we know that port 16 on leaf 1 and leaf 2 is going to go to that ESXi host, and it's attached to this VMM, okay? To this attachable access entity profile, okay? Let's go to virtual networking, VMM domain, VMware, right-click, and let's create that VMM integration. VMM, and we can label this ACI, so we know this virtual switch is going to be pushed to your vCenter. So on your vCenter, you're going to have a distributed switch labeled as a VMM-ACI. So you have to understand that once you configure this on vCenter, it's going to show with this name, okay? So now we find our VMM AAP that we previously configured. And now if we select access mode read only, that means that we're not going to push configurations to vCenter. So let's make sure that we select read and write. VLAN pool, let's find that dynamic VLAN pool that we built for VMM. Let's select it right here, and let's add those credentials. And by the way, I should have this here. This will be the name, vCenter credentials, and my password. Okay, so we got the credentials set. Now we have to point to our vCenter server IP, controller name, and we can label this as any controller name, but we just need to make sure that when we bind our vCenter, it needs to be binded onto the data center name that you have configured in vCenter. And let me go ahead and show you how my vCenter looks so you understand what I'm actually typing in this particular field. This is very important. Okay, so I have opened my vCenter, and if you can see, my data center name is Nexus_DC. So we want to make sure that we type the same name on our VMM integration. Nexus_DC. Okay. Name, we can say this VMM ACI, or in this case, it's the vCenter server. So vCenter server. Host name or IP, it will be my management IP, which is 252.10.10.20.252. DVS version, this is very important. Whichever is your DVS version on the ESXi host, and we're not talking about vCenter, we're talking about your ESXi host license. If your license or your ESXi OS is 6.0, we want to make sure that we select that. This is not the vCenter version. This is the ESXi host OS version, which is 6.0. And this is the hypervisor. When I mean ESXi, it's the hypervisor itself. So I am running 6.0, even though that I'm running a 6.7. I believe this is 6.7. Yes, correct. So I am running 6.7. But even though that this is 6.7, my host is 6.0. Okay, management EPG. So basically, this is your EPG associated to the management tenant. Let me show you how this is set up, which is basically you just build an EPG to be associated to the management tenant. And I'll show you, it's very simple. And we are going to associate those credentials that we previously input into the config, that we previously allocated on the config. So let's go ahead and click OK. For channel mode, we know that we want to run LACP active. That's what we have on the policy group. So we want to make sure that it's matching. And the vSwitch policy, I can say, well, I want to allow LLDP, CDP, or I want to enforce CDP or LLDP. I can also select neither. But the policy group, I can then select which one do I want, or if I want to run both. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it in neither. We'll press submit. So now we have this. Let me show you what I was talking about. The management tenant. Basically, what you're going to do is configure a EPG under the management side, and then this EPG will be associated on my VMM domain. So basically, we just associated during our config. So if you remember, it's going to ask us, hey, what's your management EPG? And you just select that one. Just make sure that you configure this under your management tenant MGMT. And that will allow the ACI APIC to talk to vCenter over its management IP. Okay, so let's take a look at how the VMN integration is looking. Let's see if we can pull information right now. There you go. This looks very good. We have our vCenter server is currently active. We don't see any faults, so that means that's good. We're communicating, and I should see all my virtual machines. Look at that. This is very cool. So I can see all the VMs that I'm currently running in that ESXi host, and that tells me that I definitely am talking to the vCenter environment. And you can see here my DVS is currently active. There is no fault. So now if I take a look at my vCenter, I should be able to see a DVS switch named VMN-ACI. So let's take a look at my host, and let me go to my network. And sure enough, here it goes, VMN-ACI. And this is basically the virtual distributed switch that the APIC has auto-configured. Okay, one last thing that I have to do in order for this to communicate, we have to associate it to the interfaces that are connected to port 6 on leaf 1 and 2. Right-click and manage host. So we want to associate it to my physical host. And we want to add a host to this distributed switch. Next, new hosts. And we select our host. Press OK. Next. And we want to assign the NICs. And in this case, I have 0 going to port 6 on leaf 1 and 3 going to port 6 on leaf 2. So let me assign 1 to uplink 1, and then let's assign 3 to uplink 2. We'll press next, and that's about it. Okay, cool. So now we have it assigned. Now I should be able to configure a tenant, and we're going to do a tenant real quick, and don't worry, section 4, we're going deep into tenants, okay? Let's say VMM test, and I don't even need to put a VRF because this is just a test. Application profiles, let me just make a VMM test. We just want to see if we are able to push a port group from ACI onto vCenter. Let's build that EPG. Let's call it web servers. So once I attach my virtual domain to this EPG, I should see in vCenter this label on the port group. Bridge domain, we have to configure one, but in this case, this is just for us to see how that works when we do the VMM, so I'm not concerned about it. Finish, and let's go ahead and associate it under the EPG with my VMM domain that we just configured. Let's select our VMM ACI. And you can see right here, it's dynamic because I just associated a dynamic pool. So we don't need to change this to static. It's just going to grab an ID from the range of VLANs that I allocated into that pool. Press submit. And if everything went well, check this out. We have the port group configured by the APIC. We just need to associate this to a VM, and that VM will be part of tenant and in the particular EPG. You see how cool that is? From there, that virtual machine is going to belong to a particular tenant. There you go. Okay, everyone. In our next video, we're going to begin section 4, and this is the hardcore ACI configuration that we're talking about. Multi-tenancy, ACI's ultimate weapon. Thank you for watching.